This is a very interesting diagram that I use with my students, which shows you that when we're talking climate change teaching about how the Arctic will get exploited as the ice thins, oil companies will go in and get the oil, is the interesting thing is it's American and European companies going in partnership with the Russians. So in fact, this map, which is from the Financial Times from about a year ago, shows you quite clearly that the major operators in Russian waters are Exxon, and you've got Shell here, and Shell were the major company that were getting interested in trying to exploit the shale gas in continental Russia. Now, since the Putin's rather aggressive annexation of Crimea, both Europe and the USA have passed legislation now which is restricting their TNCs from actually honouring these obligations or even operating within Russia. So because of the geopolitics, it's very possible that these TNCs are now not going to exploit the oil there. And when you factor in the falling price of the oil barrel and the fact that these ventures are now even not particularly financially viable, the prospects of Arctic oil being exploited probably within the next decade are greatly diminished, which if you're an optimistic geographer makes you think that perhaps we've got a 10-year window to finally work out solar power or something like that. So I think that's a very interesting area, and it's an interesting area in terms of the way it's shown how interconnected we are and how all these things reflect back. So at the same time as the European Union has placed restrictions on its oil companies going into Russia, the Russian government, straight back at you, begin to put pressure on Western multinationals. And that just gives you, I just found those in a quick Google hunt yesterday. Shares in Adidas have fallen because it had to shut its Russian stores. The McDonald's have shut down, so the de-McDonald'sization, it's a great big word, of Moscow. IKEA had its Moscow headquarters raided in something reminiscent of the KGB years. And BP, this is interesting, BP owns a fifth of Rosneft, major Russian gas company. Look what's happened to BP's shares because it's a major investor in Russia, so there's a lot of uncertainty over what its value. And then London, looking at what's happened to the London housing market due to this enormous investment by Russians into the London market. I won't be one of those people that just reads the PowerPoint out, you've got eyes and can see it. But there are some eye-watering sums of money up there. And this is driving up the prices of houses for ordinary people in London, Russian money. So it's all very interconnected. And I think these are very appropriate themes to be teaching. Money flows. Another thing that you see in the ALCAB document is there's quite a lot of emphasis on financial flows and money flows, which I think is perhaps something that it badly needs updating in geography. When I started teaching, trade, aid and debt was very much the paradigm of the geography of money, that you had companies investing, foreign direct investment, you had international aid, and then you had the debt crisis. And that is the geography of money. But in fact, it's actually much more complex than that and very interesting. And I'll just, again, these are just sort of tasters of things you might find yourselves teaching if you want to. Do any of you currently use M-Pesa and any of this in your teaching? Yeah, I think it's sort of catching on a bit. It's just this wonderful idea that really in Kenya, but also in some of the other surrounding companies, people just transfer money between their mobile phones. So it's a kind of technological leapfrogging where you don't need to have a bank account in order to be able to perform as a business, as a small trader. I think it's something like 18 million, half the Kenyan population or more, now use this. And it also, I think, has the capability to transfer remittances electronically between countries, which therefore means that it becomes a possible financial theme that you can use in migration teaching. This is a case study very dear to my own heart. I think some of the crowdsourcing and Kickstarter type initiatives are just brilliant geography. The way that someone in a country can fund a thing by getting 1,000 people all around the world to become their investors, and that new startups have this kind of geography where somebody embedded in a local context who really can't, just from the people living in their town, get enough investment, or they can't get a bank to do it. They just put themselves up on Kickstarter, build a small global network of supporters around themselves, and they produce the product. A lot of students are familiar with this kind of idea. And I really hope that we'll see some great case studies in places like Geography Review on this over the next few years, because I think this would be a lovely theme to bring into teaching. Superpowers. Those of you, out of interest, who's teaching Edexcel here currently? Okay, so you all know all about superpowers and been teaching it. Who's teaching AQA at the moment? Is superpowers on your course currently? I don't think the word is. I mean, the concept's there.
The countries come up, but it's under the
Yeah.
concepts of
And that's the same with the existing WJC as well, which is India and China are there, but the word's not used. But the LCAB and thus the DOE document do say that superpowers, understanding of superpowers has to be within the core content. So I imagine that when we see them, all of the A-level specifications will have sections on superpowers and what they are. So that's something everybody, you might want to go and do a bit of reading about over the summer. Superpowers, I think it's very interesting geography as well. In particular, one of the debates students love to have is this idea about whether the USA or China will ultimately become the world's biggest superpower. But it's not really a zero-sum game where if one does well, the other doesn't, because of course they're so knitted together financially, as this diagram is showing. So superpowers will be a big theme in the new specifications. One of my favourite concepts in geography that I think links together influence with systems is the diaspora concept. Because what is so interesting is the way that very small countries like Scotland and Ireland are able to punch enormously above their weight globally, because although they only may be home to 4 million people, they have populations worldwide of 40 to 80 million that claim to be Scottish or Irish. And so very small states produce these migrant networks and then descendants of migrants that under the banner of the diaspora have global power and influence. And how that is used is so interesting. Both the Irish and Scottish governments have websites where they actively reach out to the diaspora populations and they encourage business links and business relationships. They rely on the tourist flows, which of course brings up issues of how they have to fossilise their own cultures to a certain extent, bagpipes and tartan and leprechauns in order to meet the expectations, which has its own controversies, and that then becomes an impact of migration. So I don't know whether we'll see this in all the specifications teaching about diaspora, but it's a great way to link together ideas about global power systems influence with migration, which is something that we all understand. And if you're teaching like I am in a very multicultural school, you'll find it's very interesting introducing that word to students that haven't heard it and saying, which diaspora do you belong to? And I have a class which has a couple of Ugandans and a couple of Indians, one Irish, one Scots. And then there's a couple of poor old white English students that don't have a diaspora. Oh well, and a teacher as well. So that was just the gathering. Laws and norms, there's quite I think there's more opportunities in the new course to talk about laws. The phrase laws and norms is used. To think a little bit more about governance and laws than we've done in the past. I've found, as someone who's run a couple of globalization papers, students are wonderful about talking about the flavours of McDonald's menus around the world, and they love talking about the internet and how everybody's on Skype and doing Facebook. But they tend to sort of assume that it all happens unproblematically. And the governance of the internet, governance of cyberspace, these are major issues of our times. This graphic, which suggests a limitless, shrunk world, a connected place, is very misleading, because it's not true that information can shuttle between any of these destinations for a whole load of reasons. Morality, security, legality, safety. Things are legal in some countries that aren't in others. Images that can be on the internet, should they be there? Is it all right if they're available in one country and not another? And the whole idea as well that this is just I need to speed up a little bit, this is just a little graphic showing that if you're thinking about a shrinking world where people are connected, it's actually quite complicated, because the whole Chinese population is connected. China is the single biggest social networking market in the world. It's just that the Chinese population network with one another. Their networking internationally is relatively restricted. But it is an enormous social net. So for students who like to say, oh, China's not connected, That's not actually true. It's a question of scale. You've got 1.3 billion people connected, a fifth of the world's population, but within a state that tries to treat the internet as a walled garden. I think these governance issues are actually really quite interesting. My experience as a geography teacher has always been that kids used to get a bit turned off by politics when I was teaching them about dam building and capital intensive growth poles. I often used to lose a few of them. But they get very, very energized when you start talking about internet freedoms and international laws that connect to technology and things that are happening right now. And certainly the governance of tweets and what you can say, that's a kind of geography that maybe could find its way into your new teaching. And if you have students who want to do law off the back of geography, and if you're lucky enough to have them doing an EPQ or something like that, I think it's a great area to take them into. You might even be able to do your internal assessment courseworks on some aspect of this. Going through this quickly, and of course, depending on what specifications you choose, they might be very political. I haven't seen them all yet, so it will be really interesting to see to what extent the geopolitics is going to start looking like a world politics course. But I mentioned earlier that geography students are very keen to tell you what's on a McDonald's menu in different countries and say that this is a kind of resistance to McDonald's. This is what they like to say. They aren't very keen, and apologies to you, those of you at the IB talk when I said this yesterday, I'm repeating myself, but students don't tend to be very keen to use the example of Boko Haram stealing 200 girls as an opposition to globalization. But because Boko Haram translates as Western education is forbidden, clearly that action is a kind of global resistance, and it's a lot more worrying and a lot more pertinent to the world today than what's on the McDonald's menu in India, in my opinion.